Visit licensuraexams.com and try our samples completely free of charge.
Welcome back to Family Constellation Therapy. Let's continue with some techniques commonly used with clients. Use some more specificity, Eric.
To provide more specificity regarding techniques, the representative technique is a primary technique. In a group constellation, participants stand in for family members and report physical sensations, emotions, and impulses that arise when they are positioned in their respective family position.
Do the representatives literally experience physical sensations and emotions related to the family member they are standing in for?
Often, yes. This provides you with information about systemic patterns that the client may not consciously know. Floor work techniques, which adapt the principles of constellations for client therapy, utilize floor positions, chairs or small objects, to represent family members.
You can perform this work cliently as well?
Absolutely. Clients can move between different positions to experience different family perspectives. You track the shifts in the client's internal state. Sculpting techniques are another method of creating three-dimensional representations of family relationships using physical positioning and body language. You may direct a client in positioning family members to demonstrate emotional distance or power dynamics. And finally, those ritual sentences are specific verbal interventions that state systemic truths, such as "I honor your fate," or "I leave what belongs to you with you." These sentences help complete interrupted movements within family systems.
I leave what belongs to you with you. That sounds significant.
It can be. It's about restoring order and responsibility.
Okay, so how do you know if it's working? How do you gauge progress in this approach?
Assessment in family constellation therapy relies primarily on phenomenological observation, not standardized instruments.
So less paperwork, more watching.
In a way, yes. The focus is on how systemic patterns appear in the client's current relationships and their symptoms. Therapists often assess family structure through genograms that cover multiple generations. A family map looking for patterns of early death or exclusion or trauma or significant losses that might create those systemic entanglements. Evaluation then happens by observing shifts in the client. You look for an increased capacity for intimacy or changes in repetitive relationship patterns, and a reduction in symptoms that seem connected to systemic dynamics.
The real world changes.
Exactly. As a therapist, you track the client's ability to keep appropriate boundaries with family members while keeping respectful. Connection signs of success include a stronger sense of belonging, reduced feelings of inappropriate guilt or responsibility, and a greater capacity for healthy relationships.
And then there are ongoing check-ins, right?
Yes, ongoing assessment is part of it. This involves monitoring the client's assimilation of the constellation, insights into their daily life and relationships. You'd observe whether the client can keep that systemic resolution even when faced with family pressure to go back to previous patterns. Evaluation also includes assessing the client's ability to tell the difference between personal issues that might still need client attention and those systemic patterns that have been resolved through the constellation work.
This field has some really interesting terms for someone prepping for the licensing exam. These definitions are key.
You know, they definitely are. So here are some important terms to know. First, systemic entanglement. This refers to an unconscious identification with excluded or traumatized family members, which leads clients to carry burdens or repeat patterns that don't come from them personally but serve to keep a connection with their family system.
Orders of love.
So these are the principles for healthy family belonging, where everyone has a place at the hierarchy, which is honoring those who came before, and balance, which is about equilibrium in giving and receiving between family members. Then there's systemic conscience. This describes the unconscious family loyalty system that makes clients keep connection with their family through symptoms or relationship patterns or life choices that mirror previous generations' unresolved traumas or exclusions.
An unconscious loyalty system and representatives.
These are the clients in group constellation work who stand in for family members and experience the unconscious dynamics within the client's family system through body sensations, emotions, and impulses that come up. The people who stand in during the group work. Finally, interrupted movement. This refers to natural bonding processes between family members that were disrupted by trauma, early separation, or death, creating systemic tension that may show up in later generations until that movement toward connection is completed.
Interrupted movement, like love being blocked somehow?
That's a good way to think about it. So, family constellation therapy shows particular usefulness with clients who are experiencing relationship patterns that, mirror previous generations. This often suggests systemic rather than just client origins for their difficulties. Clients who struggle with unexplained guilt or loyalty conflicts between family members, or difficulty establishing intimate relationships, often get a lot from these approaches because they address those underlying systemic dynamics. The approach also proves quite valuable for clients dealing with family trauma or adoption issues or significant losses that created disruptions in family bonding processes. Those experiencing symptoms that seem too much for their personal history or that follow generational patterns may find resolution through this work that addresses inherited systemic burdens. Clients who feel left out of their family system or who carry inappropriate responsibility for family members' well-being often respond well to these interventions.
So, who might not be like a good candidate for this kind of work. Your role as a therapist, you got to know when it's not the right fit.
That's a very important point. The approach is less suitable for clients who need crisis intervention or those with active psychosis.
Okay, that makes sense. Safety first.
Always. It's also generally not recommended for clients who lack enough ego strength to manage the intense emotional experiences that may come up during constellation. Work can be quite intense.
You need to be stable enough to handle what comes up. This is where it really comes to life. A real example. Tell us about Maria.
Okay, so let's talk about Maria. She was a 35-year-old woman who sought therapy for chronic depression and an inability to maintain romantic relationships despite her wish for partnership.
Pretty common presenting issues.
But her initial assessment showed a pattern of relationship sabotage whenever intimacy deepened, and she also had this unexplained guilt and loyalty conflicts. When we looked at her genogram, it showed that her grandfather had died in World War II when her father was just 3 years old, and her father had never spoken of his own father.
An excluded member, perhaps.
Precisely. During the constellation, we positioned representatives for Maria, her parents, and her deceased grandfather. The representative for Maria's father immediately turned away from both Maria and her grandfather. Meanwhile, Maria's representative felt pulled toward the grandfather's position.
Pulled toward the grandfather?
Yes, this showed Maria's unconscious identification with her excluded grandfather, which was stopping her from fully engaging in her own life and relationships. She was entangled.
And what did you do in that moment to, help resolve that?
The intervention involved having Maria's representative acknowledge her grandfather with the words, "I honor you and your fate." Following that, her father's representative turned toward his father and said, "You are my father, I am your son," restoring the connection. Maria then felt a physical sense of relief and reported feeling lighter as that systemic entanglement resolved.
A physical shift right there.
Yes. Often the shifts are felt bodily. In the months after, Marie's depression lessened significantly and she successfully developed her first sustained romantic relationship. This showed the effectiveness of addressing those systemic dynamics rather than just focusing on client symptoms alone.
That's a great example. Okay. Time for a quick knowledge check, for your licensing exam prep. A client presents with persistent feelings of unworthiness and struggles with intimacy despite a seemingly stable childhood and client therapy. Their genogram shows a pattern where several female ancestors experienced significant betrayal in relationships and were subsequently ostracized by the family. Based on the principles of family constellation therapy, your initial hypothesis as a therapist might involve
the client is unconsciously carrying a systemic entanglement related to excluded female ancestors. In family constellation therapy, symptoms that seem too much for personal history, especially when a genogram shows patterns of exclusion or trauma across generations, strongly suggest a systemic entanglement. The client is unalloyingly carrying the burden of their ostracized ancestors, influencing their current struggles with unworthiness and intimacy. To summarize what we've talked about, family constellation therapy is a unique systemic approach that addresses unconscious family dynamics affecting client symptoms and relationship patterns. Many psychological difficulties, they come from systemic entanglements that need experiential resolution. The key principles are honoring the orders of love, recognizing entanglements, and helping those interrupted movements toward connection. It's about phenomenological awareness, embodied experience, and respecting family loyalties. And for your licensing exam, grasping this approach means understanding its systemic perspective on client symptoms, its experiential method, and its focus on restoring interrupted bonding processes. It really shows usefulness for relationship difficulties, unexplained generational symptoms, and trauma across family lines. As you think about your role as a therapist, consider this. What seems like a personal struggle is actually a quiet echo from generations past, waiting for someone to hear its story and find its proper place. And that person is you.